Hey guys, welcome back to episode 8 of our Minijet CUB build series. Today we're going to focus on the electrical side of things. So we're going to tackle modifications that we need to make to the stock electrical harness. As well, we're going to build out from scratch our auxiliary harness. It's going to run everything like our bilge pump, our blower fan, and our nav lights. So let's jump into the office and we'll get into the wonderful world of wiring. So as you guys know, this boat is based on the Sea-Doo Spark engines. That's the Rotax Ace 900. There's a couple modifications to the wiring system that we're going to need to make. And to start, we're going to talk about what has to be done to the front side of the harness. So this is the front side of the harness out of the PWC application. It's got all of the sensors connected that we need. And so I'm just going to start by going through what all of the parts do, just as a refresher. And then we're going to talk about what needs to be cut, extended, and modified from stock in order to make it work in the application. So to start on this end, we have the two connectors that go to the back side of the harness. So these guys will need to extend them, but instead of just cutting the wires and extending them, we actually sell an extension that has matching terminals for both sides, and it allows you to just run basically a big spacer to go from the front to the back of the boat. So that's pretty self-explanatory, the back end of the harness. This is the OTAS sensor, so this stands for off throttle steering assist. This guy we don't generally use, but you can't unplug it, otherwise it'll throw a fit. So we have a fancy adapter just to basically keep this guy happy underneath your dash. So we'll just basically leave that as is. This connector here is going to go to your gauge cluster. So on the Sea-Doo Spark, the gauge cluster actually handles a fair amount of the computing in collaboration with the engine control module. So you'll notice that some of the wires that go to our other controls actually go through the dash first. So you'll see there's some changes we have to make that involve it, but we don't need to actually change this all that much. This is your key. So this just gets located in your gunnel. Pretty self-explanatory. We're not going to worry about extending that. Now, these are kind of the fun pieces. So we have our throttle and reverse triggers, and we have our trim, so our VTS, and we have our start-stop button here as well. That's this guy. Basically, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving the start-stop onto the dash. So the goal is going to be to have these three sensors, excluding the start-stop button. These are all going to be going onto the steering wheel of the boat. And so for that, we're basically going to need to strip the wires back all the way down the harness, and that way we can pass them through our steering column. So basically that means running the wires all the way through this column out of this little spot here at the top, and then locating them on either side right where our fingers are going to be when we drive the boat. The other issue is that these connectors here are actually physically too large to snake through the steering column. So to get around that, we're going to be adding a Deutsch connector downstream, and we're basically going to have 3 free-floating wire sets that are going to run through the steering column. And these connectors, they do fit through the steering bearing. So that's one really important thing to keep in mind. If you were to just de-pin them and then slide them through, anytime you wanted to adjust your steering column, you're going to have to de-pin the wires again, which is a really big pain. So that's why we use these. We don't use like one big connector, which we could. 3 smaller connectors, one for each of the different devices that we're passing through, gives us the flexibility to do that. So basically, to start our modifications, we're going to be measuring about 12 inches from the back of these connectors. So that puts us at about this point here. This is going to be our split off point for all of the wiring. So there's a couple wires that say run from this connector here, will go down here, and instead of running to the back half of the harness, they'll actually just come right here to the gauge cluster. So when we split things off here, we need to make sure that we're running the wire back all the way here and then up to that point here. So to do that, we're going to repin a fresh wire and do it that way. But if you don't have the equipment to pin one of these, you can just cut and splice your own wire. But it is really important that we have all this length. I think the rest will become pretty apparent when we're kind of pulling things apart. But yeah, that's the general plan. Feed these guys through the column, so we need to isolate them, isolate this start-stop switch. Basically everything else is untouched, and we're going to repin on this side, but you can just trace the wires back and extend instead of doing that. So let's jump into it. Okay, so as you can see, we've done a lot of stripping back of the sheathing that's protecting all the wires on the stock harness. So once again, we'll just kind of go through what all is here and where it's going. So starting with the back, we have the connectors that go to the back half of the harness. So as you'll see, this is about 1 foot of sheathing left, and that's all that we're gonna leave it with. And we're basically gonna move our main splice down here where everything kind of branches off. So starting with our furthest back piece, this is the OTAS sensor. As I mentioned before, we're just gonna kind of leave that hanging out. So we don't need to worry about that too much. That can go over there. Next thing that we're not gonna really need to worry about is our key. That is also just gonna get mounted in the gunnel. Don't need to worry about that. That's fine where it is. Now we're gonna move up a little bit. So this is our start-stop wire. Now we're gonna need to move this back to branch off at this point here. But the problem is, if you see I'm pulling it out, we have a red and white and a yellow and red wire. And the red and white wire is coming into our dash connector here. So if we want to keep the dash connector at the same spot and move the branch back for the starter wire, basically what we're going to do is extend this wire to go back from here all the way back to our main splice and then come back up and then have it branch off here. So to do that, I'm basically going to de-pin the red and white connector from here and basically just rerun a fresh wire. We're also not going to be using this button. We're going to be replacing it with one of our Minijet buttons. So I'm going to just cut this off. So that's out of the way. We know what we're going to do with that. I'll drag that back here. Now, these guys are all the wires that are going up to the steering wheel. So if we lay them out, we know these need to be about 30 inches to run through the steering column. And now you can get a better idea of what we're looking at here. So if I lay the steering column there, so these wires have to be able to run from the wheel down through the column, and then we need the connectors to be back here. And just like the start-stop button, a lot of the connectors actually run back through the gauge cluster. So these gauge cluster wires are running forward up through the steering shaft, and to give us enough space, we're gonna de-pin and repin them with a fresh wire, or you can cut and splice. But basically we want these bundle of wires here to run all the way back to this splice point and then all the way back up forward. That way we have enough real estate to add our Deutsch connectors. So those are all going to be located around here. And that way we can break out the front half of the front harness, which is going through the steering wheel. And then the back half can stay on the boat if we ever need to do a service. All right, so here we are with the wiring harness after some more progress. So once again, starting at the back connector, we've managed to divide off everything that's going to the dashboard. So that's the OTAS sensor as well as the key. And then this bundle of wires right here is our start-stop switch. So those all terminate pretty early and they branch off at that 1 foot mark there. One thing about the start-stop switch is there was a butt joint that was actually a little further up here. I've actually moved it back here, so this is that red and white wire, and I've replaced it with a red and white wire running up in the one stream that goes into this bundle, as well as another red and white wire running up this stream that goes to our dash pin right here. So our dash connector has that red and white wire. It also has a black and white wire and a blue and white wire. If you follow those back, they actually come back here where they loop around, and then they follow this bundle all the way up. So if we step back once again, we've got our dash stuff. We have our gauge cluster stuff. Those wires from the gauge cluster terminate right here, and that corresponds to these wires, the black and white wires that are coming from that side up there. So the final step of the front half of the wiring harness modifications is measuring 30 inches back from these guys, which is going to end up being somewhere around where these connectors are. And that's where we're going to cut all of the wires. And at that location is where we're going to be adding our Deutsch connectors, or you can use a different connector type. Once again, just being mindful that the reason that we chose Deutsch connectors is so we can fit through this steering column bearing. So just be mindful if you're choosing a different connector, it's ideal if it can fit through there as well. So just note that there's a couple black wires in here. You're gonna wanna label them. I like to use some heat shrink, so as soon as I cut them, I throw a little bit of heat shrink of some other color on each side. That way I just know which wire, because if you do cross them, it will not work. So make sure that even though they look the same, they're different, so be mindful of that. Another note about the Deutsch connectors that we're putting at that joint, when we put these in the harness, we want to make sure one set has the female end on the upstream side and the other side has the male end. So at this break, we want to make sure that we have all three of our connectors. We have our 3-pin for our trim. We have our 2 4-pins for our trim and reverse levers. And we want to make sure that we kind of do it in this orientation where we have 1 4-pin female on one side and 1 4-pin male on one side. This way, we can't accidentally swap our throttle and IBR levers if we ever disconnect and reconnect them, because if we had matched them so they were all the same on both sides, it'd be really easy to switch these two around by accident. And that'd be a really, fairly easy thing to diagnose if you know what you're looking for, but if you don't know, it would be a really hard time. So we're just gonna do it like this so that we can't get confused and plug the wrong thing in by accident. Obviously the triangle, there's only one, so we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, that's kind of what we're going for with this. So yeah, the next thing is gonna be cutting this and extending it. All right, so the bulk of the wiring modifications to the front half of the Sea-Doo Spark harness are done. So again, starting at the back, we've now moved the split where everything starts to break off. So these are the midway connectors for the items on the steering wheel. So that's the IBR, the throttle lever, and the VTS for the trim. Then we have the dash connector that's just broken out here a little bit early, but it's the same length. Then we have all of the dash side pieces broken out as well. So we have the key, we have the OTAS sensor, and then we have the wires for the start-stop button. You'll notice I've cut the button off of this because we're going to be replacing it with our own Minijet button that we sell. And then on the other side of these connectors here for the IBR, throttle, and trim, this is the remainder of the wire. This is broken out into its own harness, so this is about 30 inches long. And so the goal with that is to be able to pass these wires through the steering column here. The key thing is that these connectors fit through the steer bearing, so that whenever you go to service your steering shaft, the connectors can pull right through there. And again, the reason that we're doing a 1 male and 1 female is just so that the IBR and the throttle don't get mixed up when we go to plug things in. They're different enough that we'll be able to make sure that they get connected correctly every time. So that's kind of the layout that we've got here for the front half of the harness. The next step is going to be taping everything up or covering it in loom to make sure that it's all nice and sealed up. There's stress relief, there's no possibility of chafing into the wires. And then after that, we can go and throw this all into the boat. We'll wrap all this up and then we'll jump to the back half of the harness next. It's time to talk about the back half side of the electrical system. So yeah, Ben, what are we going to be extending on this half of the harness?
Our electronics mount's going to go here. So there's this one wire that supplies power from the battery to the solenoid, which then runs the starter. So this one here, we can see the length is it's only about 12 inches, and we need double that because our battery is going to be located down here under the sand trap. So that we need to extend that wire, and then we also need to extend. I lost it here. This wire, which is four wires there that runs to the fuel tank, which is the level sensor, and then the fuel pump. So those are the only two things that need to be extended in the rear off the stock harness. Pretty straightforward. This one needs 18 inches of extension, and like I said, a foot extension on this one battery lead.
Okay, so pretty self-explanatory for the back half. It's only going to be those 2 connectors that we're going to need to extend. The midsection, we're going to be adding, about a 3-foot extension, 2.5 feet?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna basically do an independent center section there, so that'll keep the front and back half more or less OEM instead of really drastically extending one or the other to match.
Yeah, so that'll be on these two. So on the Spark, those are the 2 connectors that run up to the dash area basically. So I'll have to extend those a little bit.
Okay,
as well.
And so those will meet up with the dash harness that I previously just showed you guys in modified. So that'll all be taken care of. So that's all the factory electronics more or less sorted out. And then of course we've got a couple extra things that we'll touch on in a little bit. So that's going to be all the auxiliary harness required to run the more boat side systems. So we have our blower, our bilge, which aren't yet installed, as well as our nav lights, which we're getting ready to put in. So we're gonna be building out a separate auxiliary harness for that, and we'll give you guys a little tutorial on how we do that as well. Okay, so before we start building the auxiliary harness, I just kind of want to go over how we've planned everything out and how you can do the same in your boat build. So to start, everything kind of centers around this switch panel here. So this is the one that we use for the Minijet CUB. It's got an integrated fuse panel in it as well, and we have an integrated bus bar on the back. So we chose this unit just because it has everything integrated in one unit. You can do the same in your boat as well using these three components. So our Minijet switch panel, our fuse panel, and our bus bar. Every turnkey boat gets a combination like this, except for the Minijet CUB, which has everything integrated in one unit. This is generally a little bit more visually appealing, but this is simpler. So that's what we're gonna work with. Now we sell all of these products on our website. So whether you wanna go the more complex and fancy route here or the simpler route, everything's available on minijet.ca. The main objective of our auxiliary electrical harness, first and foremost, is getting power up to our fuse panel. So based on the positive lead, we're gonna be switching all of our circuits. So we're gonna run a 14 gauge wire on here. You can see from our battery all the way up to our fuse panel, which is around here. And we're gonna be tying that in on our bus bar here, which is then internally distributed through the fuse panel and through all the switches and is able to send power to all of our devices. From there, we can see our red wires run all the way back, and these are going to branch off to all of our individual devices. So we have our bilge pump, we have our blower, and we have our nav lights. Those are all tied into the system like that. On the opposite side with the battery, we're going to be using a bus bar just like this. So we'll have our battery that's going to go to our bus bar here, and that's going to distribute the negative power side. So that's going to run straight from there up and then into every device, nav lights, bilge pump, and blower as well. Now it's all pretty straightforward. The only complicating factor is the automatic side of the bilge pump will need to take off power before the switch. So for that, we're just gonna be unplugging this lead on our bilge pump switch, and we're basically gonna add an interrupt here where it says auto bilge fuse power. That's gonna jump between this power lead, which is fused, and our actual switch on and off there. So that way the bilge pump always gets power for the auto mode, and whenever we switch to manual mode, we can just flip the switch on and it'll override that. So pretty straightforward in terms of the wiring architecture. We're basically just trying to get positive and negative to every piece, and all the positive is coming through here, where all the negative is coming through the bus bar, which sits beside the battery. So let's get into how we actually construct the auxiliary wiring harness. Now to link everything together, we're going to be building this custom harness using our lovely wiring board here. If you're doing a one-off, we generally wouldn't recommend building a wiring board. The wiring board really helps in this mass production application where we're building several boats that we're never going to be the exact same. But if you're just doing one boat, we'd recommend running every wire individually through your gunnel using our zip tie mounts that we talked about in our last video. So basically you'd set those all up where you want your wires to run, and then run your wires through all your zip ties so you know that they're going to the right spot and they're the correct length for your application. So like I mentioned before, we've got this lovely wiring board here. In addition, we've also got our wiring diagram. So this is a little bit more specific, and it's gonna let us know all these little details about wire gauge, wire length, and termination type. So to do all of this, we'll need some male-female spade connectors, as well as some ring terminals and butt connectors. Whenever you're shopping for those for your wiring harness, we recommend that you get really high quality materials. We use ones that are heat shrink, as well as have an adhesive on the inside. So that makes sure that there's a nice watertight connection at the end. And when we're selecting our wire, we always use at least a 16 gauge wire. For some runs, we'll be using this 14 gauge material, but this is marine grade wire, so it's pre-tinned copper on the inside. So that makes sure it's nice and robust, and there's a minimal chance that you'll have any wiring faults within the wire itself. So there's a couple things that we do that are a bit unique, but we'll kind of dive into those a little bit more once we're more into making the harness. And if you're gonna be making a harness for your own boat, we sell all of these components here on our website. So be sure to check those out if that's something that you're interested in. For wire and connectors, we recommend you source something locally, generally a little bit more economical with the shipping. Yeah, beyond that, I think we'll dive into it and catch up with you guys when we're midway through. Okay, so we've done most of the wire runs for the wiring board here. So as you can see, we've laid both the black and red conductors, and they're all branched out appropriately to their final locations. There's a couple things that we haven't done yet. So these are spots where we have to crimp 2 leads into 1 butt. So I've just left them as a bend, and we'll cut those apart later. Same thing here, there's another little pigtail we have to run. And over here there's a splice that we have to run. So right now I've just secured everything with this fabric electrical tape, and that just keeps everything nice and together. And we'd use this tape just because it has like less of an oily residue if you ever have to take it off. So that's most of the runs done now. The next step is going to be using these tools. So we have our wire stripper, we have our crimper, and then our torch to crimp down our little connectors. So this is an example of one of the connectors that we'll use. Pretty self-explanatory on how to actually install those, but the next step of the process is basically trimming all these wires to the exact length that they need to be, and then installing the connectors on the end. So we left a little bit of excess just because we weren't sure how things would warp while we were taping it all together and laying it out. Now that it's all more stable, we can trim to length and strip and put our connectors on. So we're at the point where we have almost all of the connectors crimped onto the ends of the wires. So you can see that here, all of our wires are run like we previously touched on. So we're quite a ways through in the process, but at this point I just wanted to touch on a few little tips and tricks that we kind of do that you might find helpful when building your own harness. So the first is make sure you have enough extra material. We always overrun our lengths and then cut back once everything is taped up and we're ready to put the connectors on. That way, in case things move around, it's a lot easier. You obviously can take away material, but you can't add material. The next thing is when you have these connectors, make sure you buy a lot of extras. It's always good to crimp and test the connection mechanically without shrinking the heat shrink tubing on, and make sure that you have a good electrical connection that way. And so whenever you don't have a good electrical connection, these will just slip off and then they're garbage. You can't re-crimp them back on most of the time. So make sure you buy enough, probably like a 25% extra, I would say, especially if it's your first time doing it. The next thing is the tape. We use this Tessa brand tapes. This is like a fabric tape. It gives a little bit of a nicer appearance and feel than the vinyl tape, which tends to leave like a bit of goo behind. So we tend to prefer this Tessa tape. You'll see us use this a little bit more when we loom the harness at the end. But yeah, just a note on that. And then all these different locations have multiple connectors. So this is a nav light connection. You'll notice that we have one female and one male connector as opposed to having both female or both male. Typically what you'd want to do is have both females on your power side so that if they accidentally ground out against each other, they can't, unlike two males, touch the ends and short out. This still does that. You'd be pretty hard pressed to actually have these touch together because the female side is shielded. But the main benefit when doing this is whenever we're in low light trying to diagnose the electronics, it makes it a lot easier if one side is male and one side is female. That way you can't accidentally reverse the polarity on them. So that's why we do that way. We've done that for quite a while. So all of our negative wires are male, all of our positive wires are female for lighting. Just makes things a little bit easier. And then after that's all done, we've got these labels that I've just made up. It's always a good idea to label your wiring harness. They sell really fancy heat shrink tubing that you can print on. It's not something that we're going to use today. Even just a piece of tape with a Sharpie scribble on it is better than nothing. So that way we know where everything is. We can then pull the whole harness out of the board and then we can add our loom after. And this way when we're ready to put the harness into the boat, it makes it a lot easier for the guys to know what connection goes where, and we spent less time troubleshooting and trying to find continuity and stuff like that. We've got all of our devices here, our bilge pump, our blower fan, and these guys just get butt connected on. You can use spade connectors for this application if you'd like. We choose butt connectors just because it's one less thing to go wrong. These are going to be crimped on next, and then we're going to heat shrink the whole thing. Like I mentioned before, we've tested all the mechanical connections with the crimp. None of these are actually heat shrunk on yet, so that's the next thing that we're going to do. Let's jump into it. All right, so we've done a little bit more cleanup of the wiring harness. So since the last time we touched base, our next step was to label all of the wires so that we know what they all do, and we're able to take them off the board. And as you can see, we've got everything rigged up to test and make sure all of our electrical connections are good before we shrink all the tubing on and really lock everything in. So got our PWC battery here. We've hooked up our negative bus bar. We have our blower fan that's hardwired in. We have our bilge pump that's hardwired in as well. We've got both the automatic and manual leads in there. And then we've just got a loose LED nav light that we'll just go around and test all the connections with to make sure that that's all good. And then for the star of the show, we have our integrated switch and fuse panel here. We've got the cover off just because we're still playing with the wiring. But if you look on the back here, it's got everything that you need to set it up to run how you like. Yeah, we've made all the necessary wiring connections there. And with the battery plugged in, we can see that everything works as expected. So this is our nav light. We don't have a light connected, but if I kind of jimmy this guy up, you'll see that that works. So we've tested all the other points. We know that that's good. Fantastic. Next up, I believe this is our bilge pump. And there you go, you can see that when we flip that, we go into manual mode. And then to test our automatic mode, we'll just hold here and you'll see that it'll start moving. So there we go, automatic and manual mode of the bilge pump work great. And then finally, we got our blower fans. We know that works really well. So now that we're happy with the way that everything works in the auxiliary wiring harness, we're good to shrink down all of the terminals, and after that it's just about looming it, and then we'll put it into the boat. So kind of the last couple steps here. So like we touched on before, we were going to heat shrink all of these terminals to get that nice waterproof seal. So that's all done now. These are all nice and shrank on there. So every connection is mechanically strong to start with, and then now it's doubly strong that everything is sealed together, and now it's fully weatherproof as well. So I think I said I was gonna use the heat gun. I tried that, it didn't work out so well, so I used a pocket torch instead. Now the last step of the process is adding this wire loom. So we use this split loom. So basically you can just open this. It's got a split all the way down the housing. And the idea is that you basically put the wires in the split loom, just like this, and then you seal both ends, and then you cut the loom to the appropriate length. The benefit of this is to minimize chafing once the wires are installed in the boat. This way you're not ever having your bare insulator rubbing on anything aluminum. You always have this plastic in between. And it also just gives a nicer and cleaner look to the harness once you're done. So basically we're gonna be using some of this 1/2" loom and some of this 1/4" loom, depending on what fits best where on the harness. And yeah, we'll be adding that with a little bit of tested tape on the ends to secure everything in place and make sure that looks nice and pretty and is chafe resistant by the end of it. All right, so we're in pretty good shape with all the wiring done and basically ready to drop into the boat at this point. Now, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like down below, drop a comment, let us know what you thought, and we'll be sure to catch you in the next one. See you on the water.